Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Life, the Universe, and All the Rest, also known as LUAR, which in Portuguese means moonlight, which is beautiful because today we do have a Brazilian physicist with us, which I'm very happy about. So, Gabriela Lemos is got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, UFMG. And then she got a PhD degree from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ, which happens to be the university I got my master's degree on. So here we go. We have the same home. So Gabi is an experimental quantum physicist, and we're going to talk a little bit to her about her life, her professional trajectory, and of course about her research. And then we'll see where it all goes, right? It's a random walk along Gabi's work.
Through topic space.
Through topic space. I love that. Yeah. So, Gabi, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get interested in physics? As a woman from Minas Gerais, I assume, because you went to your undergraduate studies there. So tell us a little bit about how did it all start.
So I'm a very privileged woman because my mother is a scientist. And so my mother's an epidemiologist and a professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, where I did my undergraduate studies. My father's also a professor and he works in economics.
Okay.
So I kind of grew up literally inside the university. So I went to preschool, kindergarten, everything at the university. And then when I was 5, we moved to London, and where my parents did their master's, PhD, etc. So we stayed in London for about 7 years. So that's, again, so I grew up in, going London School of Economics and
wow.
It's funny because my
School of Tropical Medicine and Health. And so, I mean, I'm kind of very privileged there. And so I've never actually imagined myself anywhere else. I was kind of one of those people where I didn't even know what the job world was outside.
That there was anything else.
Academia. Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So basically so when I was a teenager, I was interested in physics, in psychology, and philosophy. So I was like, maybe I'll do philosophy or psychology or something. But then my friend, I have my best friend's dad was a physicist, and he was, telling her, like, come on, you should do physics and blah, blah, blah. And a friend of his came to give a talk at the university. And what convinced me was that he said, he looked all like crazy and interested, and he would walk around like this. And he said that he was interested in the world, and he'd gone to the Department of Engineering at the time. He was Portuguese. And everyone had, like a blazer on and, collared shirt. And he said, what the heck is this? It's not me at all. And he's like, his hair was all everywhere. And I just want to know how the world goes. And so he discovered that the Department of Physics, that's where he should go. And I found that great. I was like, that's me.
So you didn't start off, so as a kid, like when you were, like 7, you weren't like, I want to do astronomy, I want to do physics. It came much later.
Oh, no, I was curious about everything. I still am, actually.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird, because then later that came back to haunt me, kind of, because I have, my partner is a physicist, and he was reading Penrose at the age of like 12, I don't know what. And I'm like, what? And I didn't have that, but I was asking questions about everything, about the world, and I was having my parents. I remember reading on a paper when we were in Argentina that, like poverty had reduced 30% in Argentina. I was like, Dad, look how cool. And he's like, what's the definition of poverty that they're using? Is it the same as they were using before? I was like, oh,
So
you know.
it's yeah, right.
Hey, wait a minute.
It's, there's a metric and there's propaganda, right?
Yeah, so kind of that was my thing, basically. I was very good at math, and physics was kind of not something that was difficult, but it wasn't also, you know, everything that was about big questions seemed interesting to me. That's why like philosophy and psychology also seemed very interesting, because I wanted to know how the world worked. So basically it was just, you know, let's see how it goes. So as soon as I started undergrad, I thought I wanted to work on cosmology. And I went to some professors and I couldn't really find someone who worked quite so with the questions I had about like, what is it? You know, where are we? So I thought astrophysics, and then I went to the astrophysics lab, and they were all on computers and all these numbers, and I was like, oh, you know, that's not what I want. I want to lie under the stars. You know, a bit romantic. And so I went to the course, the head of the department, and I said, look, I don't know what to do, because I came to physics to, you know, to know where we come from and everything, and I'm not finding it. And he said, you know, the big questions that you're looking for, they're in the big things and they're in the tiny things. So that's when I went to study particle physics. So I went to particle physics because maybe that's the answer, right? Some of my answers could be there. And when I got there, I started studying, and this amazing professor, Maria Carolina Nemes, she said, oh my God, I'm so excited about these experiments that Serge Roche is doing in France, in Paris, with these, you know, cavities, and then, you know, there's like an atom in the cavity, and then a photon goes through, and it maybe it excites the atom, maybe it doesn't, and it's like a Schrödinger cat state. And I look and I was like, oh my God. So I dreamt that I was a photon going through an atom.
No, really, wait, you had a dream of that?
I did.
Wow,
That you are a
I
photon. That's amazing.
And then I came back to her, I said, I want to study these things. So
that is
I
a great
did.
story.
So
That is I have
working.
never heard a story like that, because, you know, I think, right, I mean, all of us here went into physics because, right, it was the big questions. I accepted I was going to do math and do calculations. Okay, that's part of it. But really, I wanted the big questions. And just, I love your story of like, you went here and they're like, no, you're going to run a simulation. You went there, and, you know, and quantum mechanics. It's so funny that quantum mechanics, which isn't supposed to be, it's supposed to be just about reductionism and atoms bouncing against each other, and that's all there is to the universe. And it's that science where actually the big question shows up. Yeah.
And you know, this is
Exactly.
amazing, right? It shows how sometimes an encounter with the right person can really frame a path, you know, because Gabi, you were telling a story and I was like, holy cow. I was, as a teenager, I was the same way. I loved philosophy, psychology, physics. I was incredibly confused exactly because of the same reasons, like I'm interested in the big questions, etc. And then I did go into engineering and I really disliked it, especially I was doing chemical engineering. And actually, I was doing chemical engineering at the same university you work on. And I'm like, nope. So I left and I went to do physics at PUC. And that's where everything changed, because I had the luck of having a professor of electromagnetism who said, okay, apart from doing all these works, you know, boundary conditions with the electric field, this, that, and that out, we are going to have a end of course project where you can choose any book you want in physics and read it and give a talk to the class, you know, and write a little essay. I'm like, wow, okay. And then that was when Steven Weinberg had just published The First 3 Minutes, which is, come on, where do we come from, right? So, and that's the book that I had the luck of finding at that moment. And I said, okay, it's going to be cosmology. So Amazing. You could have been a cosmologist too. It's just like, whoop,
If you
you went,
found right, if it would have been a
right?
different person, who would have shown you that no, we are doing big questions, right? I mean, that's the weird thing about science is that it's supposed to be about big questions, and often, and this would be something for us to talk about with quantum mechanics, because I'm always amazed how many quantum physicists are not interested at all in quantum foundations, right?
That's
That's
true.
always
Yeah.
startling. It's like, here it is, and measurement. Who measures? What is a measurement? And they're like, whatever. Don't do that. That's a career killer. To ask that question.
Yeah, I think it's like the thing is that I don't think it's just, I think there's many physicists who just, I don't know, they just seem to be doing and not, and they forget this connection. Maybe it's
Exactly.
what actually brought them into physics in the first place, and then they just lose touch with it, and then they just and then I think for the students I see a lot, I talk to a lot of students, and often they don't like that. Why am I doing math? Why am I doing all of this? And I say, look, don't forget to connect to the things that interest you, because sometimes it can feel like it's not going anywhere, but it is. All these techniques you're using are going to help you. But I think that, I don't know if in the US it's the same, but in Brazil, physics is one of the courses that has the least number of people percentage of people who complete the course. So, from 50 that enter each semester, you'll have a small amount who finish. And I think a lot of it is because we kind of tell them, well, the professors or the course tells them that, this isn't where you study the stuff you're interested in. We just do a lot of calculations, which is not true. Well, it can be true. It depends.
It's weird that physics, like an intro course, will start with, the most boring parts of it. Like, oh, you have a chain on a table and calculate how fast the chain, as opposed to being like, hey, relativity. Like, right, you could just start with relativity and then introduce quantum, and then back up and do quantum. But it's funny that it's almost like we purposely bore the crap out of our students.
I was just going to say that in physics, we learn the same thing 3 times, right? Because you learn mechanics, electromagnetism, and some quantum stuff and statistical physics in the beginning, and then at a junior and senior, right, at a more advanced level. And then as a graduate student, you do the same thing again. And then eventually you go into the more, specific stuff. It's kind of a strange way of teaching physics, but it's because of the math. A lot of it is because of the
Yeah,
mathematical
there's so much
expertise.
technique.
Yeah, it's because of the technique. And I say to my students that they're basically, it's like running, a triathlon. You have the day to day, you just, you're working out, you're doing like your training, and it's not going to be the triathlon, so that one day you can go and you'll go a few times. And the brain is a muscle, and basically what we do in our course is just kind of like, just lifting weights, and it can get so boring. So I think that it's important for us as mentors and professors to keep reminding them, look, this is, you're pulling your weights, but this is where we're going, and this is why this is cool. And even we lose sight of why it's interesting. So I had to teach this course where they just have to throw a coin up and down 100 times, and then record how many times. And I was like, oh my God, I hate this. I can't believe I'm going to have to tell them to do this. And then I told a friend of mine, and he's like, oh, it's so beautiful. I was like, what? Beautiful? It's so boring. No, because you're telling them about this and that. And he reminded me why probability is beautiful. And then when he reminded me, I was able to give that same lesson, but with kind of telling them a little bit about the history of probability,
with enthusiasm,
Bayesianism versus frequentism, and then kind of the whole 2-hour class changed completely from something where they'd have to just, you just have to compute how many times you get heads and tails, and then, in the end, you're going to, do a normal distribution, whatever. And basically then, it becomes something interesting.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of work sometimes, even for us to kind of get that basic physics and basic math and trying to remember, why is that interesting?
Well, I think
But
that
it was
analogy,
interesting.
the analogy with the triathlon is great. The one I'll use with my students is dance or art. Where like, if you want to be, a principal dancer at the Met, right? It's not just you walk in. There's just like these endless hours of perfecting that, that one stance or, and building the muscles. And that's why you can eventually do things that appear like they're magic. And so, yeah, reminding people that this is, I always like to tell people physics is hard. It is hard. But of course, you don't get to know something extraordinary unless you do the hard work. And so, yeah, but like you're right, always reconnecting. I mean, for me about the arts is at least, you can connect to like this magic thing is going to happen when you're done, when you reach it. So,
Yeah. So it's important to remind the students of that when you're teaching as well. Like once in a
right,
while, just stop and say, okay, let's look at the context of why we're doing these calculations, right?
right,
And then it's not just about solving this equation, these boundary conditions do this or that. This equation tells a story. I'm very much about telling students that an equation or an
yeah,
experiment is really a story that has telling us something very important. And then I don't know, with that kind of context, it becomes a little more, I wouldn't say magical, but at least a little more exciting for them to understand why I'm doing this stuff, right? And you're right. I
right,
think the analogy with arts and sports and musicians, I
yeah.
mean, you want to
Music.
be a
That's a
classical
good one.
pianist? I mean, you know how many scales you got to do to be a class, and then and then eventually you playing a Brahms sonata or whatever it is that you're playing. So it makes sense, that there is that part, which is how we express what we know about the world, through the mathematical equations and the concepts, all of both.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Gabby, I just wanted, Gabby, I wanted to ask where, I mean, so right now, what is it? So it's interesting that given your inclinations, you chose experiments. So if you're an experimentalist mainly, right? Or you're not, am I
Well, no,
wrong?
well, yeah, kind of. It's weird. So I never wanted to go to the lab. I
I know,
hated
me too.
labs.
I hate the lab.
I hated labs. And,
Nothing ever works.
in the intro lab course, I remember, I exploded some stuff and, I just dreaded what I was,
Right.
I was like, oh my God. And it's funny. So what happened was kind of just, again, circumstance. I tell my students, there's no linear course in science. There's no one way to become a
Yeah.
Right.
scientist. Some people, they find their inclination when they're 13 or 12 or even 8 or 6, and then they just go for it and they go for it and they go for it. I'm kind of a bit more like, I'm broad. So I'm kind of, I have these antennas, and when something shows up, I kind of follow them. And so I was doing, so I was studying theoretical quantum optics.
Hmm.
I did my master's on that, and I was super interested in, I just kept dreaming. Why the heck is it that, I was like this Alice in Wonderland, like quantum land. That was me at night, dreaming. And then I was like, why do I have to wake up from these dreams? And that bothered me. And so I started studying decoherence and quantum open systems and quantum chaos as a kind of, again, to try and understand the quantum classical boundary. Because I remember, why is this boundary so weird? And why is it such a boundary? Nobody likes that. Nobody likes a theory to jump from one thing. We want to take H bar to 0 and everything becomes classical, but it doesn't.
Right.
So I worked on this for my PhD. I went to Italy. I did some part of my PhD at Non-Indian Complex Center in Italy, in Lago di Como, and I was happy as can be just as a theorist. And happy. And then I decided I wanted to go to Europe for my postdoc, just for a change of, and I started applying. And here's the thing, I would write letters and letters and letters, and I'd get very few responses back. And sometimes even from people I knew, which annoyed me a lot, because so when you go to a conference and you're a woman in physics and you're a young woman in physics, a lot of professors kind of, they're nice to you, and and then when you write to them and say, I'm interested in working with you, they kind of ignore you, and you're like, but wait a minute, so why were they nice to me? And I think you have this weird thing where you don't know if your ideas have any value, or is it just, I remember I won this poster thing when I was, I think in my master's, my master's. And then people said it was because of the clothes, like, because I was wearing a nice, cute dress and because I was cute. And a lot of people told me that, girls and boys, and you start believing them. And especially when all those professors who are super, willing to listen to all your crazy ideas at the conference don't answer you when you're asking for a postdoc. And then you say, okay. So I thought, I don't know what to do. And I was in Bolivia in this crazy, hiking trip. And at some point I went to a LAN house. Many young people won't even know what a LAN house is. One of these, we didn't have internet Wi-Fi. We'd go to these places where we'd pay per 15 minutes to use the internet.
Right,
We had these big computers.
Internet cafes.
LAN.
Yeah. And you just type on this. And then I saw an email from on the 31st of December. I was just going to say, there was no WhatsApp, there was no, so I wanted to send my parents, this is 2011 or 12. And I was going to send my parents, Happy New Year's, I'm in Bolivia, I'm just, writing to say I'm alive. And so there's an email from a professor of mine at UFRJ, Paulo Henrique Ribeiro. He said, there's an opening for these Vienna quantum fellowships from the whole Vienna group. Why don't you apply? And I was like, nobody's answering my emails. Oh my God. So, and he wrote, I know you won't feel inclined to do it, but just write the email with, the application with your passion, and let's see. And so I did, and that was it. And so I got an email from them later, and there were 300 applicants, and 3 people got the fellowship in the end. I was one of them. And
Excellent.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And they sent me to Vienna to see which group I would work in. I said, look, I'm a theorist. And then Anton Zeilinger says, don't you want to come work with me? And I was like, I'm a theorist,
Yeah, right. You have equipment. I don't want to touch equipment. It breaks.
So tell people who Anton Zeilinger is, because maybe some people won't know.
Anton Zeilinger is a quantum physicist who's now a Nobel Prize laureate, who has worked a lot in the foundations of quantum mechanics and has studied entanglement, and has a reputation for working with photons, so light, and for trying to understand the fundamentals of quantum mechanics through experiments with photons. So he's
a god. I just want to add, he's kind of a god in the field.
He's a wizard.
In quantum
He's a
foundations.
wizard.
He's a wizard.
He's a wizard.
So I got there, and I'd studied his experiments, all of them. And so he's like, when he says, come work with me, I was like, oh my God, but I don't know how to, can I be a theorist? And he says, nah, you come work with me in the lab. I said, but I don't know how to. He says, you'll find out.
Yeah.
And he gave me that vote of confidence. And
that's amazing.
It was amazing. And I have to say, I did hear from a professor of mine back home, maybe you fooled him because you're very passionate, and maybe he thinks you're better than you are.
Oh, God.
And
gee.
What a jerk.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's with I've seen this with women too, that male professors are just their bias it's just whoa, let's just wear it on our sleeve, our bias.
Yeah, basically you fooled him, and
My God.
I took this, I was like, oh my God, maybe I did. So I got there thinking, oh my God,
No.
Right. No, it's just
I don't know what to do here. So I worked my arse off and to learn what to do in the lab. And there was this student who was there, and that's kind of like this thing with being a minority. So there were two women at the time in the whole group, and it was an enormous group.
right.
35 people. And there was one who was a PhD student, and Marissa Justina, who's amazing, is actually working on Google, and a student who was like an undergrad who was kind of in one of those leap years, like didn't want to go to a PhD, didn't want to, and that was Tori, so Victoria Borish. And I said, geez, so what am I going to do here? And he said, Anton says, you do whatever you want. What question do you have? Just, you can go for it. And I was like, what? And then when people tell you that, then you freeze because you think,
isn't that amazing?
I don't know what question I have. Maybe I don't have a good question. Maybe my questions are just stupid, And it was super hard to have the confidence to say, okay, this is an interesting question. And he had, and then he told me the things that he was, he's very passionate. So I remember we had lunch and he had all these things that he wanted to talk about. And he talked about these papers, these old papers from the 80s, right? Leonard Mandel. And I got really fascinated with that. So I said to this girl who didn't know what she was doing either, because she was like, Tori was just sitting there. She said, I don't know what I'm doing here. Nobody, I'm just an undergrad and nobody really, we're just the three of us were in one office and actually Marissa was next door and we were in an office and all the guys were in the offices downstairs. So they wouldn't invite us to beers and stuff. We didn't even know.
Wow.
They would start collaborating because they were sharing offices. So they started collaborating and stuff. And I just said, Tori, do you know anything about labs? She says, no. I said, neither do I. Let's do it. Let's do it. So we got one of these things and we started working on them. And a very, an amazing physicist, Radek Łapkiewicz. It's very difficult to say Polish names for me. He's in Warsaw now, but he was a PhD student and he has these wonderful ideas. And I said to him, look, I'm really fascinated by these Mandel things, but I don't know what to do with them. And he said, I had this idea. So he gives me an idea. And I said, okay, will you help me? Because I don't know how to go to the lab. And, he goes, yeah. So he would sometimes show up, and Sven, another postdoc, he was a student also, would sometimes show up. I'd ask them help. And then we would just figure stuff out, me and Tori, like all day, all night. I remember. And so we just did, it was 1 year of so much work. And then by the end of that
to go from
year,
theory
we
to
published a
experiment.
Nature paper in Experiment. And it was amazing because I was so excited because it's like, oh my God, I don't know anything about, experiments. And here I am.
I'm always amazed by
an experimentalist.
Yeah, so I'm always amazed by those quantum optic experiments, like the alignment. You have like these 25 lenses and filters and collimators and mirrors, and I'm like, holy God, how do you even know what to put where? It's really amazing how a theorist really has no clue when you're so far away.
It's just Lego. That's the beautiful thing. Once I understood it was Lego. It's Lego. So you've got this, and then you've got that, and then the light goes, and light is so nice because you know what it's going to do. And so you just kind of, it's Lego. And I'm very kind of, because I was a theorist, I calculated everything and I made a simulation. I knew exactly what was happening. So I had so when I put things on spot, and people would be like, no, you put it on spot and then you look for, and I was like, no, I have to calculate. So I'd be looking. So it has to be 53.215 centimeters. And people are like, you can't have that precision because the lens is this thick.
A theorist's understanding. Yeah, right. I need 58 decimal places or else I'm not doing this. Yeah.
Hey, did you?
I would say it won't work out. This can't work out because it's so imprecise. I mean, look, I've got all these calculated things and it has to be that way, and it's not. I can't put it in that way. Nothing's as thin, nothing. And I remember my colleague saying, look, it just somehow it works out. Look, these guys are doing experiments across the Canary Islands and stuff, and somehow they can do it. So just trust that it will work out. And it does. It's amazing. I still find it amazing. So I accidentally ended up in experimental physics, and then I couldn't leave after that, because after you've worked with Anton Zeilinger, everyone wants you to do the stuff, they're like, oh my God, you have to, because he's amazing. So he becomes like this figure that, so if you worked with Anton Zeilinger, you worked in experiments, you should do experiments. Nobody wants you to do theory anymore because,
Did you ever tell him that you had a dream you were a photon? I bet he would love that. You did?
He loves this.
I bet he
loves
did.
that. He loves, and I love talking to him because he's fascinated exactly with the big questions, and he's never given up. He's never said, okay, no, I'm just going to, he's always pursuing those things, and he's always thinking about the history of the physics, and he's very artistic. And at the time, I've always loved working with art and physics and art, and he was preparing an exhibit for the Documenta. So I was like, wow, the Documenta, that's so cool. And so it kind of resonated also with kind of his interests and my interests. So I think we had, I had fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Wait. I'd like to shift the conversation because we only have 20 minutes left. And so I would like to ask Gabby the question, just so people know that Gabby's part of a collaboration that was about what's called cubism, quantum Bayesianism. So when we just finished a paper together, all three of us actually are part of a large paper about sort of the interpretation of quantum mechanics. But Gabby, I want to ask you I want to ask the John Wheeler question. So let's spend the next 20 minutes talking a little bit about quantum interpretations. So John Wheeler's question: why the quantum? What is quantum mechanics trying to tell us? What do you think quantum mechanics, with all its weirdness, is trying to tell us?
So the first thing I think quantum mechanics is trying to tell us, and I think the most important thing, is that we have to be humble. That, we think that we're so magnificent and we can understand everything. And that's the thing. We think that it's just a matter, that the world is ours. The universe is ours. And, we're not. It's not ours. We're part of it. And so because we're part of it, we can't fully comprehend it. And science it's always been this authority. So if you, the laws of physics comes from the fact that, they're right. And also the scientists took the place of the priests and, and this, and the shamans, and then, we know everything. And then it's just saying, no, we don't, and we won't. But it's still nice. We don't and we won't.
That's great. Humility is the first. I like that. Humility is the first thing that quantum mechanics is trying to tell us. Yeah.
And then I think that quantum mechanics, so that's the first thing. I think this is really amazing. And that science is a human endeavor. That's another thing that quantum mechanics tells us, which is kind of related. So, Bohr tells us already, look, we are part of the experiment somehow. You can't detach yourself. So that beautiful book on objectivity that we talk about in our paper by, Gallison Peter Gallagher, Gallister and Laura, what's his last name? Yeah. So I love that, because what is objectivity, right? What is this notion of objectivity that was constructed throughout years and years and years and centuries of science? And there wasn't always this idea that, we would look at science from the at nature from the outside, and that what we were recording was absolutely independent of who we were or, what we were. They show that actually that was an important part, having this special way of looking at things made you a scientist and part of what you were discovering. So the discovery had to do also with yourself somehow.
Yeah. The book, just to wait, the book is, because I just looked it up, the book is Objectivity by Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison, and recommended to everybody. It's fascinating
Beautiful
to see
book.
how much objectivity, the idea of objectivity changed radically. So when people are like, oh, science and objectivity, it's a very recent, that version of objectivity is very recent. Throughout science, there were other definitions of objectivity, right?
There were, so quantum mechanics tells us, look, we're looking through the lens of everything, who I am, enters. I know it sounds a bit esoteric, but somehow it is, because if the photon will only answer the questions I put, and the way I set up the experiment limits what kind of answers it can give, which seems, then I'm there.
Right.
Then it's not about...
That's nicely put. You must be part of the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Then I'm there.
I can't tell the electron where to go. I can't tell it where to go, but I do tell it the options. I give it some options or other options.
That's
It's a
nice.
conversation.
Yeah.
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 That's a really cool way of thinking. I've never heard that before. Right. You can't tell it where to go, but you can constrain it. And by constraining it, you're constraining sort of the possibilities that it will manifest. Whereas before, in the classical view, sort of like you just weren't involved at all in some sense,
Think of it as a dance, right? And I love dancing. So it's always this idea that when you're dancing together, it's neither of you are doing exactly, it's the dance only exists in this meeting of you two, right? And if you look at tango, you're leading, someone's leading and someone's following, but they're not exactly following, are they? Because if they dance with someone else, then the swivels and the dance is made of these two people. Because if it were just one leader and follower, the follower wouldn't have to know how to dance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Isn't his book called The Dance of the Photons?
The Dance of Photons, it's called. Yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Yeah, it is a beautiful book.
It's the dance. And I think it's the dance of the scientist with everything that they bring. And everything that they bring with them, and of the electron with everything that I don't know what an electron is. Zeilinger says that the photon is a click on the detector, but I don't know. I think there's, I think the photon is, in a sense, because the photon's already a conception in our heads, right? But what is it that was there? So, there's something, and there's how, but there's the world we describe is a creation of this that happens in this interaction. It's not our creation. It's not, but it's something that happens in this interaction.
Mm-hmm. I had this crazy thought the other day, which is connected with this, which is that a photon, light, is the only thing we know that has energy but has no mass. I mean, maybe if gravitons exist, we don't know if they do or not. They'll be the same way. But how can something exist without being stuff? And yet it does, right? And which then made me think, does that mean that energy precedes matter then? Because if energy precedes matter, right? I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. You look at the way the Old Testament starts, right? And let there be light. It is the first thing that happens in is this freaking light. And then here we are saying there is something that exists and has no matter. And so, I mean, you define it by energy. And I'm like, what? It's somewhat
But the interesting thing,
right?
I'm sorry, because I'm doing relativity right now. But the interesting thing is because of that, it can't stop, right? Anything with mass can have,
no inertia.
in some frame of reference can have zero velocity. But light's not allowed. That's the other weird thing. Light's never allowed to stop moving.
Right.
So, you can never hold, a photon. I mean, you can exchange it back and forth and everything, but yeah, they're always, they're doomed to no time. Time never passes and they never stop moving.
Exactly. Time never passes.
Mind.
That thing like my brain.
Yeah.
Because what? You know,
Yeah,
Right?
right.
It really is
you're following a
mind-boggling.
light beam and time. So what's going? Because you know this idea, this dream of mine where I was a photon. It doesn't even make sense because in reality, if I were a photon, I couldn't be seeing myself pass through
Yeah.
the cavity. And that just
There's no
blew
time.
my
No
mind.
time can't pass for a photon. It's fucking weird.
And then
All right. Well, so go ahead. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, nothing. It's just that the weirder thing is that when I tell the students about this, I think photons are because of this thing that they don't have mass, because and then it's like, oh, but then I tell them, oh, you know, the electric field and the magnetic field, but fields are just, you know, fields are, but actually they do exist because that's what light is. But wait a minute, but light is an excitation of that field. But what is that thing? Oh my God! And then you talk about the cavity with the photon or the cavity with vacuum, and then it just there's no photon there, but the field is there.
Right.
It's just not
The standing
but then
wave, the
that can't
standing
exist
EM
because
wave
if the
is.
field is like a classical field, then it won't make sense. And so it just, so I
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the Casimir effect, right?
Oh my God, what the heck?
Right? I
All
mean,
right, let's
It
explain
shows
for
that
what is the Casimir effect?
so
So the
basically,
audience knows.
it's this idea that if you have two metal plates, right, which are charged and have an electric field between them, right, you can have a perfect vacuum. Well, a close to perfect vacuum. Gabi can tell me that there is no such thing, but empty space, right? And so, even though there is empty space, because it has an electromagnetic field in there, the plates will attract each other with a certain force that goes with the inverse of the fourth power of the distance between the plates.
the fourth power,
Yeah. So it's like if nothingness, right? Because there's nothing there, has an attractive effect on something that we can see and measure, right? And that's just mind blowing.
So it's the vacuum. It's the vacuum.
The quantum
Suppose that, which
vacuum.
is alive in quantum mechanics because of
Yeah.
all of the weirdnesses of quantum mechanics and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The vacuum isn't empty; it's a froth of virtual particles that are, you know, appearing and disappearing before they're able to measure them. But there's an effect.
Which
So,
can
Gabby, let me ask.
have
I'd like. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just because I had a friend who works with the Casimir effect and who did an experiment, and it's just so difficult because it's so little the effect,
yeah.
Tiny. Yeah.
that he had to isolate everything. So he got like tons and tons of bubble wrap, and he bubble wrapped like his whole lab and his everything, and it was just like he and he said he thought he would do he did this very professional thing of you have this the table is floating and everything, but then you need so much that you just go to on the internet, you get anything and everything that will absorb, and then you just get like foam, and it looks
That's
like
great. Bubbles,
most,
styrofoam bubbles. That's what I love about
unsophisticated
laboratories,
experiment
right?
in the world, because you get there and you're like, what the heck is this? But it's just because because what you're trying to study is so subtle, but it's
Yes. Right. That's really
So,
remarkable.
Gabby, just to finish, so there's lots of different interpretations of quantum mechanics, right? There's the original Copenhagen interpretation, and then there's the many worlds interpretation, and then there's so where do you come down on that? Where, when you think about like how should we think about what quantum mechanics is telling us about the world, right? Or about us in the world, like of the different interpretations, where do you come down on them?
So I've been there with the many worlds, but then I don't know about this wave function of the universe. It just seems it's funny because there was a professor who said, I don't like many worlds because I don't like to imagine that all my other selves are maybe living horrible things. And
all the terrible decisions you made are playing out in some other universe.
That's a pessimist, because some people say, hey, others may be doing better than you. So there you go.
That's true, yeah, right. My other self.
Right.
Exactly. And I have the opposite because I have FOMO. So I don't want to believe that the others are, having more fun than I am.
Exactly.
The other me's are having a great time. This universe sucks.
So I don't go down on that, and I don't like the fact that the probability doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
So so then I you go back to the drawing board when because in my life I went through many ideas. I think that was one of the ones that stick to a lot. But then I was like, nah. So then and then I ended up being more and more interested because of Anton Zeilinger in kind of a more informational neo-Copenhagen interpretation. And then I met Chris Fuchs and I started, hanging out with the cubists, and they're very charming. And so
Chris is very charming. Chris Fuchs is the guy who invented cubism, and he's a character. He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, he is.
And I just, I very much like the idea of this participatory realism, which is kind of what I said before, that, you don't have an object, you don't have a subject, and you have this kind of like idea that reality is kind of immanent. What worries me a bit in cubism, and that's why I won't say I'm 100% a cubist, and Chris calls me a cubissal, because I'm not...
Cubicial-ish. You're cubist-ish.
is because I feel I worry. I remember when I started talking about this I worked at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and some people asked me, but isn't this a bit kind of neoliberalist? Isn't it a bit individualist? Like just there's this one scientist interacting with this one electron, and they have priors, and they will and from basically I have my priors, and then from there I'll update my probabilities, but then I don't have to have the same priors as you, and I don't have to get to the same probabilities as you, Adam, on the same experiment. And it kind of feels a bit too individualistic. And in this world where I feel one of the biggest problems we have is the fact that everyone's just me, I want something that's more about us. And science for me is political. So what we say has I'm certain it's very political, and it has an effect. And I want to think of how we can understand it kind of more as a collective endeavor. So I'm with Cubism in this participatory realism, but I do think that it's more, we do have something where we can't all just have our probabilities, we have to connect them somehow in order to have a shared understanding of the world, just so that we can live together, and so that's why, we met in this consortium which was studying metrology, and that's what I found fascinating about metrology, because in metrology I have each quantum clock, they're just ticking along, but somehow I have to do a transaction with Japan. So there has to be an international agreement as to which clock has to follow which, because they will never be in sync forever.
Yeah.
So every so often they have to come together, and some of them will jump. And I tell my people I meet, like, look, your clock isn't always going. Sometimes it will jump because there's this universal time. And this is an agreement. And so we have to have these agreements. But then how do you understand an experiment in this kind of context, like a quantum experiment in this context, and still maintain the Bayesianism, still maintain the subjective Bayesianism, which is what Cubism...
Way of looking at it. Just for our, Gabby, just one second. So for our listeners, so metrology is the study of measurement. Like, just what the heck is a measurement? And that was one of the best things about this project that we were all part of, that Chris Fuchs and Gabi's husband were leading, which is like, let's think about quantum mechanics, but let's really think about it in terms of like, measurement. What is a measurement? And this idea, I agree with you, that it shouldn't be about one agent. It should be about communities of agents. And I've always was advocating for that it's a difference,
Yeah. And when we talk about measurement, that becomes so much clearer, right? Because we have to what is a kilogram? And that involves the whole community. And
standards, agreements, communities coming together. And that's right. I couldn't do an experiment in a lab by myself. Who built the equipment, right? I didn't make everything from rocks and, and water. I mean, there's always a community of scientists. So
how do we agree when we come to different probabilities for different outcomes? How do we, because in subjective Bayesianism, my probability assignment isn't better or worse than your probability assignment. And also, we know mathematically that they don't have to agree. If we start with different priors, means I have to start with different beliefs. We're subject to the same experiments, and we use Bayes' rule to update our probabilities, which means, that obviously if I open the box, the cat's still alive, then I probably
we're all back.
Yeah. So I want to update that. It doesn't mean, so in subjective Bayesianism, we don't have to agree on the probability of the cat being alive 5 minutes from now. And I get that, and I believe that somehow, but then how can we construct a science where we all kind of have to agree on something? There has to be something where the collective comes in. And I don't think I don't know how that comes about. I think that's a lot of what many people, in these neo-Copenhagen interpretations are thinking about. I think it's this big enough friend scenario, which we don't have time to talk about, is a little bit about that, or maybe a lot. And so that's where my brain is kind of stuck. Like, where is it that the
intersubjectivity, the community,
how does that come in? How can I build that into the foundations? Because it's one thing just to philosophize about it, but we have to build it into the foundation.
And be able to do experiments that verify one way or the other that this is the right interpretation. Well, we should probably end on that note, just because we're reaching sort of our usual time. So, Gabby, this was great. It was wonderful talking to you. I'm going to keep the dream that I did, the dream of a photon, for a long time. So,
that's great.
Marcel, anything from your side?
I think we should do one with Jacques at some point. Bring you both together and talk together about this.
That would be fun.
No, I think that would be very interesting, because Jacques, we did this with him right at the beginning of the podcast, and it'd be interesting to see
one of our first guests,
how he would react to this notion. That there is some individuality here, and science is really about community. And maybe there is a way out of this. And maybe it's about sharing stories. That's how you build a community. I don't know. But that's a completely different way of thinking about science, right? It's like we agree after the experiments because we're sharing the stories of our experiments. I mean, that's right. That's not usually how you think about doing science, but maybe quantum mechanics is asking for a different way of doing science or thinking about what's going on. And maybe you guys are hitting at something important. So awesome.
That's what we discuss about when we're washing dishes at night.
Sometimes
I get very upset.
Sometimes you talk about other things, right? Yeah,
Then
who's going to change,
cries,
right? Or who's going to...
All right. Thank you so much, Gabby.
Right.
That was lovely. Yeah. Very, very nice.
You.
Hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you both. It's always very fun.